In this video we will take a look at gas magazine disassembly, maintenance, lubing it up and putting it together. Before we get started, a couple of things that need to be mentioned. Gas magazines, they most of the time work exactly the same. They have the same parts. Everything will be pretty much similar. So if you don't have this exact magazine, there is a high chance that the procedure and what you will do will be exactly the same. One difference you might encounter is that your magazine has a pinned base. In this case, if you see two pins instead of a screw on the bottom, I would not recommend going into the base because it is very hard to put it together. You have to clamp it, you have to put a lot of force on it so the holes align and then you can put the pins in. That is beyond the scope of this video. Generally, we don't recommend disassembling these. Also, if your magazine is working, you don't need to do all these steps. You don't need to disassemble a valve that is perfectly fine. I will do it for the sake of completeness and I will show you everything that you can do, but you can cherry pick the individual parts that are applicable to you. So if it ain't broken, don't try to fix it. Only do this if you feel like a specific part needs a maintenance or if it's giving you trouble. Maybe there are BBs getting stuck in the BB channel, or maybe you have leaking base. Then I would go ahead and disassemble it. Other than that, not really necessary. Let's get started with disassembling. First, we will remove the base. Usually you have to push down this pin that's holding it in place and you just remove it. Before we start unscrewing any screws, we will make sure that it's empty and there is no gas inside. We do that by pushing this valve in. If it's easy to push in, there is no gas inside. If it's hard, just remove the gas. You can just push hard enough, it will release the gas. Some people don't like that because it could potentially damage something, even though it never happened to me. You can also put it in your pistol or a rifle and just dry fire, and that will get rid of the gas. All right, we don't have any gas inside, so we can move ahead and we will start with the fill valve right there. So we will take a valve tool. Doesn't matter if it's looked like this or if it's a little bit different. You can find it, this particular one, in the toolkit that we have on the website, but you can use anything that will allow you to remove it. Make sure that every time it's nice and aligned because you don't want to shear off the slots on the valve itself. At some point you can just go ahead and do it with your fingers. Once it's completely unscrewed, just get it out like this. Now we will proceed and disassemble this valve even more, because if you are getting leaks from this valve, it's likely the O-ring on the inside, which we will lube or potentially replace. Usually you can unscrew it with just your fingers, like in my case. If not, you can use pliers. If you are worried about scratching it, just put some cloth, microfiber cloth works pretty well, or even a patch. You can put a patch in there and you can hold it without scratching it. Okay, we have these two pieces out. And now at this point, you will encounter the first quote-unquote issue. There are two different valves. You have one-stage valve and two-stage valve. Here we have one-stage valve, and that one usually has an O-ring on the inside/outside from this side. You can clearly see a black O-ring right there. Now this one prevents us from just poking out the needle easily and get to the O-ring that is here. If you would have two-stage valve without the O-ring here, then it would be very easy to just get it out. You have a choice right now, and that is either leaving it as it is or trying to force it out by just, putting a bit more force on it, or taking a needle and fish out the O-ring. Usually results in breaking that O-ring. Now the easy way with this particular valve would be to take thin silicone oil and putting a little bit right here and letting it flow down to the O-ring where we need to seal it. The downside of this is that there will be silicone oil in the magazine. It could get to your hop-up if you put enough of it in there, and that will decrease the effectiveness of hop-up and the BBs will start dropping, so you will need to shoot the pistol or a rifle a few times, and then you would have to clean it, and eventually the silicone oil would only stay in small amount where it needs to stay, and then the rest would be just out. I will do the hard part and I will remove it. That might result in this O-ring getting damaged, which is not necessarily an issue. You will only notice when you fill with bottle and you might have a little bit of gas spill around it. That is by design with two-stage valve. This is not it. You could also then replace it afterwards. I believe this is the same O-ring that you can find in a lighter. Of course, you can get them. They are not something super special, but they are not everywhere and not easily accessible. All right, let's just try to get it out. Okay, I might be able to use this base as a holder. And we were successful. And here is the O-ring, undamaged. Here is the body, and here is the needle part. You can go ahead and remove these individual O-rings. We have two here. Sometimes there is only one, depends on the design. But you can also just leave them on, and we can loop them like this with a small amount of silicone oil. Here we also have an O-ring that is easily accessible from the outside. Now when it comes to the actual maintenance and lubing part, we will do that a little bit later. We will move ahead and we will remove the base, because here we have a screw and not a pin. Take the correct size bit and unscrew the base. There we go. Here you can see that we have another O-ring right there with a washer behind it. We can also leave it there. It's not really necessary to remove those. And we will wiggle out the base. Be careful, the spring is still under tension, so don't let it spring out too much. This one stays captured. No, it doesn't stay captured, so we can remove that. Here we have the O-ring that can, over time lose its sealing capabilities, so that's probably the one you are interested in if you are removing the base. All right, there we go. Since we are at this step, let's make it complete by removing it. You don't need to remove it, you can also lube it from the outside with just a finger and a little bit of oil, but again, for the sake of completeness, we will remove it. Okay. Now we need to get off the feeding lips with the gas route, and that we do with this pin right here. If you look closely, you might be able to see that one of the edges is serrated. That is the one, that is the end that you don't want to drive through the whole thing because it's slightly wider and it would just cause some scratches, some minor damage on the inside of this whole thing. I've done it before, I made that mistake, it's not the end of the world, but try to see where the serrated edge is and go from the other side. I believe this is the correct direction. And there we go. Here, hopefully you can see that this part is serrated. There are small little edges to, increase the friction and just keep it in place. If I pull out the complete thing, the other edge is, or the other side is completely smooth. This can vary from magazine to magazine. There is no universal rule as far as I am aware. All right, we have the feeding lips and the gas route out, and now we remove the valve on the back side of the magazine. Again, we will use the valve tool. Make sure you are in the slots and start unscrewing. And there we go. We have the valve on the table, and this is basically the shell with nothing in it. All right, now we can proceed to cleaning. When it comes to cleaning, the part that we are probably interested in the most is the BB channel, because if you get dirt, debris in there, some gunk buildup, whatever the case might be, it will prevent the BBs from traveling freely into the feeding lips and subsequently into the chamber of your replica. What does that mean? The gun will just not shoot, there are no BBs coming in. So this is the part we probably want to clean the most. Of course, we can clean everything else, but this one is the focus. What options do you have? Well, depends what you have at home. You can go simple and you can just take a brush and just get everything out, and that's usually enough. You can just take preferably with long one so you can actually get in the edges and just get everything out. Now, in this case, this will be perfectly fine. I don't see any oil. This is quite a new magazine, so I wouldn't need to do much more. But maybe if you have an older magazine, maybe it fell into the mud, you might want to take it a step further. The next thing you can do is taking rubbing alcohol and Q-tips or something that allows you to get in there. There are plethora of different tools that you can use, but Q-tips, that's usually something we all have at home, something similar. So we will use these and we will just get some alcohol on top of it. This is helpful if you, for some reason, got some oil or grease or just some weird stuff in there, you want to dissolve it and you want to get it out. You can go from this side, get especially the sides because that's usually where it stays, from this side, and you basically want to make sure that there is nothing that could cause the excess of friction. This is one way. I'm not gonna continue, but you make sure that it's perfectly clean. I want to keep this video relatively short. Next step you can do, you can just take this into the bathroom. You can just take soapy water and you can use a toothbrush or this one and you can just clean the whole thing properly with soapy water. That will get rid of all the stuff pretty well in my experience. I've done that myself before. I have a bucket of water here which I will not use because I would have to wait until it's dry. I don't want to continue the maintenance and disassembly with or assembly with a wet magazine. So if you do that, make sure that it's properly dried. Put it somewhere where it's slightly warm and just let it do its thing. Also, what you can do is getting compressed air in a can like this one, or if you have a compressor, you can just blow everything out. Some people don't like Q-tips because they can leave stuff behind. This is a way to get rid of them. Even though I sometimes use only this, I never really had an issue. I leave that up to you. These are the options that you have available. And if you have more options, you just need to get this clean. That's the end of the story. Let's say this is now clean and we can move on to putting it together slowly and taking care that everything is lubed. So let's do that. Before we get to that part though, make sure that you are using as little lube as possible and only put it where it matters. That would be usually the O-rings or the seals. As for the lube, we use silicone oil. It's easily accessible. It's in the maintenance kit. You can get it pretty much anywhere. Simple. This is simple and it works. I've been using it for ages. Many people have been using it for a very long time. Silicone oil is just fine. Doesn't really matter if it's like a thick one, thin one. You can use any of them because we already have everything disassembled. Thin one would be good to get into places if you really want to, be lazy and just like put it from this end. I don't recommend doing that. You could do that and the thin one would get easier to the O-ring, but we already have access. We don't need to do that. What are the other options? You can also use grease. That one is thicker. It will not spread as easily, but again, it doesn't matter that much because we will only put a tiny amount where it matters. So grease, also good. You can also use different oils based on PTFE, Teflon, stuff like that. We want to keep this universal. So what you have at home available and it doesn't eat the O-rings, that's good enough for us to make sure that this works and seals. We will get a little bit of silicone oil. Don't put it directly on there. That usually results in too much of oil. I like to just put a tiny drop on my finger and just like run it in between, make sure that it's looped, and that's perfectly fine. Let's not forget about this one. And also we can put a bit on this one. This one is very forgiving, it has a big surface, you can tighten it with the tool easily, so this one relatively easy. All right, once we have that and there is no excess oil anywhere near, we can start putting it together. So this piece will go tip first into the valve. Then we have the spring onto the tiniest spring guide I've seen. Just make sure it's placed in correctly and close the whole thing with the cap and screw it on tightly. Fingers is enough. You don't really need to use pliers anymore. I never had the case that this would just, unscrew itself. Just never seen that. This O-ring that goes from the outside, if you have it, again, this depends on the valve type, you can place it on there and then you take a tiny little flathead screwdriver and you can work it on the thing. There we go, using 2 bits proved to be quite easy. Cool, now it's in there, exactly where it should be, and we have the valve in place. We can put it in the base. Now there is no particular order. I just like to remove pieces and make bigger pieces so I don't lose anything. So that's what we will do. Tighten it, not too much, slight pressure. If you would over tighten this one, it's a thin, small piece. If you really put some torque on it, you could just snap the head off. You don't want to do that. It's not necessary. The O-ring is on flat surfaces. There should be no issues when it comes to the seal. All right, now we take this one that goes on top of that. Again, a little bit of silicone oil in my case. You can also use something else if you prefer. Just make sure it's appropriate for the application, and we will put it back on. Good, just like that. Since we are already on the valves, we will take this one, and if you look closely, you will see we have 1, 2, 3 O-rings. All of these we want to loop a little bit. Be aware that this is directly in the way of the gas. So the gas, when you hit the valve, the gas goes in through the middle and goes through the holes on the side. So if you would put too much here, it would suck it into the system of the pistol, which would result in bad hop-up performance, which we don't want. If you choose to, you can also remove these O-rings carefully. Try not to rip them and do the same like we did with the other ones. I never find it really necessary, so I'm gonna show you this simple way, but you can go as far as you want. Good. Tiny bit of oil. Should be just fine. And we will just place it back. Again, only a little bit of torque. No need to over tighten it. You can always tighten it more, and if you see that it's just not enough, it's leaking, tighten it a bit more, but for starters, don't overdo it. All right, now let's take a look at the gas route and the feeding lips. Again, this is something that you want clean. If you see that there is mud, dirt, sometimes it falls the wrong way around into a puddle, make sure it's clean. Use soapy water, what have you. This one is pretty clean. Now when it comes to this one, again, what I'm gonna do, tiny bit of lube on the bottom and on the top. That's all we need. You can also use grease. That's it. These are the contact surfaces. We don't need more. Also wipe your hands in between. Take your time. Make sure that you don't spread the silicone oil too much. I want to do this video in a reasonable time, so you don't have to watch an hour-long video. Now we place it back, and if I remember correctly, the pin was like this, serrated edge on this side, so the smooth edge or end will go in first, and I'm just gonna tap it in place. All right, make sure that it's nice and flush with both sides. Perfect. Now we have one more O-ring right here. Tiny bit, spread it around. I'm gonna make sure that I get the other side as well. With a little, there we go. This one is not as critical as the other ones. There we go. Now before we put it together, wipe the fingers again. Follower go in there. Again, make sure it's clean. Obviously, that's why we are doing it. And let's not forget this part right here. Which goes inside of here. Just like that. You can also put the spring back from the top. It depends in which order you want to do the assembly / disassembly. And the last thing is to screw it together and test if we've done everything correctly. There we go. And we are ready to go. Just like that. Not leaking. We are done with our maintenance. Make sure that you leave a little bit of gas inside, so all the O-rings or the seals are always under a little bit of a pressure, because that keeps them in place, that keeps them quote-unquote expanded. They just keep sealing. It's better to leave a little bit of gas inside in gas magazines and no CO2 capsule in CO2 magazines. So there we have it. Now the last tip I want to give you before we finish the video, actually an important one, is that after you do such a maintenance that involves oil and putting in a magazine, make sure to now shoot your replica at least 1 or 2 magazines, and then clean the replica, the barrel and the bucking, because it could be that some of the oil, even though we put as little as we could inside, gets onto the bucking, especially if you overdo it with the oil part. And then the hop-up just doesn't work, the BBs don't have the reach. Shoot, make sure there is nothing more in it, and then clean the barrel and the bucking, and everything will be as new. All right, there you have it. I hope this video helped you, and I will see you in the next one.